Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The Limerick Poltergeist. My name is Callum O'Brien, and I have lived in Ireland all my life. I live in a big family of 6, my mother, father, brother, and 2 sisters. We lived in a large house at the time of the haunting that took place 5 years ago. I was 13 at the time. The poltergeist activity mainly occurred around my sister, who was 12. I will call her M. It all began one day when my sister and I were walking home from school. M slipped and hit her head on the curb. She wasn't in any pain and claimed she could hardly feel it. When we got home, she climbed straight into bed and fell asleep, even though it was only 3:30 p.m. The rest of my family sat down for dinner. We decided not to wake M. When M came running out of her room screaming, she was in a great shock. She told us that the blanket slid off the bed and that someone pulled her out of it. My parents put it off as her imagination and sat her down for dinner. That was the start of the haunting. Weeks later, M had fallen in sick and was confined to her bed. During this period, strange noises would be heard around the house, mostly from M's room. It sounded like a hammer banging off the walls. Again, we put it off as the house making the noises. Neighbors would come over and complain about the noises, but we told them we didn't know about it. When M had gotten better, everything was peaceful for a while. She would complain that her bed would jump from time to time and that she found it hard to sit down in a chair without it rocking away. My parents began to accept something was wrong after they witnessed pictures flying off the wall and the chairs sliding across the floor. For a while, M, myself, and my other siblings were sent away to live with an aunt. When they realized it had followed us there, we returned home. The attacks on M got more violent. She would be thrown out of bed, pushed down and dragged up the stairs, thrown off chairs, slapped occasionally, and would have objects thrown at her. She would constantly be confined to bed, as she would constantly become ill. Even in bed, the attacks continued, sometimes locking her bedroom door so we could not reach her but only listen to her screams on the other side of the door. Word spread throughout the community about the going on inside our household. Neighbors would come to visit us in hopes of seeing something unusual happening. Their hopes would be answered by having stones, plates, and even pieces of turf thrown at them. One neighbor thought of calling the incident the O'Brien haunting, and it stuck for the rest of my life. A friend suggested we get a priest, so we did. 3 different priests at 3 different times. Neither one of them worked, but one thing did help. The attacks on M became less frequent. Unfortunately, the poltergeist didn't leave completely. It still liked destroying furniture and throwing objects around. 3 months after the priest came, the poltergeist had vanished without a trace. Peace finally overcame our household. Everything was quiet again. M was back to normal, but she missed a lot of school, so that was a downfall. I'm now 18, and we are still living in the house that inhabited our unearthly friend. The exact location is a small town in Limerick. The Speakeasy Ghosts. We have cats and dogs, but the cats sleep outside unless the weather is bad. One of them slept in last night, and at 4 a.m. my husband nudged me and said the cat is at the door meowing. I opened the bedroom door, and there she was, so I said, "Oh, honey, I will put you outside." As I was walking down the stairs, I noticed that our huge dog, who was part wolf, was agitated and wanted to go out as well. So out back they both went. I stood outside for a while, but it got chilly, so I went back inside while the pets roamed. As I was standing by the door, I heard what sounded like someone hammering in the kitchen. I quickly moved into the kitchen and the noise abruptly stopped. As soon as I went to the back door, the noise resumed. I ran out the back door to get my guard dog, but he would not come into the house. He would not budge. I was cold and so crossed over to the house again, and boom, the noise resumed. I'm a very rational person, and my second thought was that it sounded like a heavy branch banging on a window. The problem is, we have no branches even near the window. I started to get nervous now. Back towards the kitchen, and the noise vanished. I ran to the garage to get the dog's collar and leash and brought him back in the house. Then I went upstairs where my husband was sleeping. I said to myself, I must be tired and it's Friday the 13th. Next morning, my mother-in-law asked me what that banging sound was at 4:30 in the morning. She reported hearing multiple voices and banging. That confirmed it for me. The only other person in the house was my husband, who had fallen back to sleep and had not heard a thing. This house was built in the 1800s and was once used as a speakeasy. It is big, and there have been several unexplained events, mostly involving electrical appliances and lights going on and off. The fan turns on and off as well. I often wake up and hear voices, but I block them out as it scares me. My husband has had strange encounters as well, and he is a man of science. Nobody can sleep alone in this house. You feel like you are being watched almost all the time. The price of ignorance. I sat with my two best friends, John and Chris, in the park, eating a fantastic picnic that we had made. It was so delicious, and the sun had come out to welcome us as we set up camp. Every summer vacation, the guys and I went down to Cullen Park, where we would spend 3 days camping, which began with us celebrating no parents for 3 whole days with a giant picnic. Ever since I can remember, we would do this, as it wasn't like anything dangerous could happen out here. We lived in a small village called Braketon, which was inhabited by just over 500 people. John and Chris were my best friends since the dawn of time, and we always hung out together, just doing whatever. It was really convenient that Chris's mom worked in a bakery next to the only corner shop in the village, because whenever we planned an adventure like this, his mom would conveniently give freebies that we could take with us. We hiked up to our usual spot just below the biggest oak in the entire park. Then, once camp was set up, we arranged a pile of logs for a campfire, like normal, and started on demolishing the huge food basket. Sandwiches galore, cakes, sweets, pasta, salads, crisps, onion rings, and loads of fizzy drinks. It was fantastic, as always. When we had had enough, we packed away the leftovers, not that there was much left, fished out the marshmallows from our backpack, and settled down for the night as we chatted about anything and everything. We put the world to rights over a Coke, laughed at the cringing moment when John had asked Renee if she wanted to go out this Friday. She said, "Who are you again?" Actually, we generally spoke of nothing but things to do with the girls we liked and disliked, junk food, and our favorite band, Hot Shot 11s. We were still talking until about 2 in the morning, when we all slowly ran out of steam and drifted into a dreamless sleep. That was when I heard it. I had woken up at about 3:30 to put the fire out in case something caught fire. I was just putting the last of the flames out when I heard a heart-stopping screech coming from the trees behind us. I didn't know what to do. I got up with a torch to see if there was anybody out there, but by the time I had gotten up out of my sleeping bag, it had stopped. I thought to myself how scared I was when I had heard the noise, but when it had stopped, I realized that nobody else had woken up. Had I imagined it? That would be plausible, as I'm alone in the dark woods of the park late at night, with 2 friends sleeping peacefully beside me. My imagination was bound to run away with itself eventually, if not inevitably. I settled back in my sleeping bag, almost positive that it was just my imagination. September 26. Debriefing Officer PC Christine Pollen. Interview commenced approximately 1500 hours. Let's take this from the top, shall we? You claim to have been asleep through the night of the 15th of July, on which night your friend and a neighbor, Chris Whitmore and John Hartford, were tortured to death. They were strangled, suffocated, burned, and then cut into pieces. Is there anything I missed? Please stop me if I've missed anything. Will you listen to me for a moment? Even if you do continue to plead not guilty at your court hearing, the judge will still send you down for at least 20 to life. Just stop wasting police time and help yourself, okay? The judge might be generous to you and only give a maximum of 19 years if you plead guilty and start cooperating. Prisoner number 6723, Robert Mulberry. I did not murder them. Officer PC Christine Pollen. What we would like to know is why. Why murder 2 of your closest friends? Did they make you angry? Or had you had just enough of their friendship? Prisoner 6723 Mulberry. I did not murder them. Officer Paulin. You say that, but are you trying to prove to us that you are innocent or yourself? That's the real question. We have evidence to believe you murdered your friends because they made you upset. They did something that you didn't agree with. You had an argument over it, and the argument got heated and too out of hand. What were you fighting about? Prisoner Mulberry. I did not murder them. Why do you continue to prosecute me over something I didn't do? Officer Paulin. I'm sure you didn't murder them, but then if you didn't, who did? There was nobody even remotely close to you in an 18-mile radius. Your friends did not murder themselves, in which case, even though I don't doubt you are innocent, but until proven so, the evidence is against you. So you are seen as guilty, and the court will refuse to listen to your side of the story unless you do plead guilty. Do you understand that? If you plead guilty, you could get a reduced sentence. Even more reduced, if when you are in prison you're good, and you could get bailed or put on parole. You never know. The judge might even be generous and give you the minimum sentence until you are proven guilty. As you are here anyway, why don't you tell us your side of the story? What really happened that night? What do you recollect? Prisoner Mulberry. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know what happened. I can't remember anything. But I do know that whatever did happen, it was not of my doing. Something came for us, and it was not something from Earth. I know you will not take me seriously, but I will keep trying. You have to see what is happening to our world. It is no longer what you thought it was. Now, there are supernatural things out there, whether you like it or not. Officer Paulin. That is enough. I am sick of having to have this conversation with you. You cannot blame other people, or in your case, supernatural beings, for your mistakes. There is no such thing as UFOs, aliens, monsters, or ghosts. You have to stop living your life believing in such things. People waste their whole lives searching for things that don't exist. You aren't going to be one of those people, are you, Mulberry? Prisoner Mulberry. No, ma'am. I'm not going to be one of those people, because I know for certain they do exist. There is no need for me to search for things that I've already found. I have seen such wonders, things that you would not believe even if you had seen it with your own eyes. Officer Paulin. Enough, just enough. I have enough of your claptrap for long enough. Sergeant Smith, please take prisoner Mulberry to his cell. As he has obviously not slept for a while, he has started to hallucinate and delude himself. Interview terminated. Prisoner Mulberry. How you've done it. You refused to listen to me. So now you die. In about 6.5 minutes, all the lives in this building, except for mine, will be terminated, all because you wouldn't listen to a prisoner. In half a minute, the electrical appliances will all fail. Fridges, computers, phones, ovens, printers, everything will go down in this building. You'll be in darkness for a small amount of time, and then if they pick you to join us, you will be born again. If they don't pick you, well, then let's just say you had a good life while it lasted. Au revoir, Christine Paulin. The Oxfordshire police said it was the biggest arson attack they'd ever seen. There were 600 people in the police station at the time of the attack. There were no survivors. They couldn't understand how the coroner's reports on the bodies suggest that it was not arson that killed the people. The victims all died at exactly the same time, all with exactly the same symptoms to lead to cause of death. They all died of panic attacks. The chief of police decided to keep an eye on that particular area where the fire was supposed to be started. He died of an unexpected sudden heart attack later that day. The coroner's report also stated that all 600 bodies and the chief of police had a strange mark on their bodies, all in exactly the same place. All of the bodies had a scar above the left ear and the shape of a crucifix. Nobody is sure what this is supposed to mean, religiously or anything else. The worst of the losses in the police force was the death of Officer Christine May Paulin. She suffered the worst of the burns. All of the prisoners died in their cells. except for prisoner number 6723, Robert William Mulberry. His body was never found, but it is impossible to say that he walked away from the fire, as the fire was too serious. None of the victims were recognizable, even from their dental records. The police think the records of prisoners kept were insufficient, which is why they have reason to believe that they had miscounted prisoners. Robert Mulberry did tell them, but it is too late to tell them, "I told you so." They paid the price for their ignorance. What's done is done. The Spectre of the Horse-Drawn Carriage. 1978. It was a balmy night, and the bedroom window was slightly ajar. Vivian had drifted off into sleep beside me in the bed, and I was reading something, my head propped against the headboard of the big double bed. I'd paused to reflect on my reading and was gazing over the book toward the end of the bed and the window, but not really looking at anything in particular, as you sometimes do when drifting into thought. A flicker of unexpected movement beyond the bed and to the right broke my contemplations, but its complete unexpectedness, combined with the fact that I knew there was no one else in the room but Vivian, froze my reactions for a few moments. But what I saw remains clear to me to this day. The movement that caught my eye had been the appearance out of thin air in the room of the spectre of a gold-gilded black Victorian horse-drawn covered carriage, with one man dressed in black in the driver's seat and holding the reins. The carriage was empty. Soundlessly it moved across the room from right to left, and before my stunned senses could react, the horse, or horses, I still cannot be sure to this day if the carriage was drawn by one or two horses, began disappearing through the wall that separated us from the neighboring house in our second story end of the block maisonette home. Then I was shaking Vivian, but of course as she stirred from sleep it was too late. The whole spectral vision had simply passed through the wall, and I was left like an idiot trying to explain what I had just witnessed to the sleepy woman beside me. Before I go on, no, I had ingested no drugs, drunk no alcohol. I'm not prone to hallucinations, whatever they may be. Am and was of good sound mind, and I am intelligent about enlightenment. There was no explanation other than to accept I had seen what I had seen. That came a few days later by even more unexpected means. I was sitting in our living room, and Vivian was preparing a meal in the kitchen when the knock came on our front door. Vivian reached the door at the same time as I did, and we opened the door to two strangers, a young man and a young woman. The woman carried a collection tin and began to explain. "We're doing a house-to-house collection for the girl at the end of the block," she said. I had no idea what she was speaking about and said so. She looked nonplussed for a moment before saying, "You haven't heard?" They told us that a young married woman living in the ground floor maisonette at the other end of our block had suddenly passed away a few days ago. The collection was to help her bereaved young husband, who was out of work and had been nursing her through her illness. After they left, we made no connection with the odd scene I had witnessed in the bedroom. The connection happened a few days later. We were again in bed when our young cat wandered into the room, walked across to the window, and jumped up. The window was hinged open a few inches, and after a moment of hesitation, the cat stepped out into the gently downward sloping 3-inch wide ledge that ran alongside the 8-foot-long window and gingerly began creeping toward the far end. The problem was the far window was closed, and the cat suddenly realized there was nowhere to go other than to turn around on the narrow ledge and make its way back. By now, I was sitting up in bed alarmed. The window was about 50 feet from the ground. I was trying to figure out what, if anything, I could do when the cat attempted the impossible turn and slipped off the ledge. In a flash, I was over to the window and had flung it open to look down. It was dark, with just a little light spilling out from the other window, but I couldn't see anything. I hauled on some clothes and shoes and grabbed a torch on the way out, wondering just what I'd find. We'd only had the cat a few months, given to us by a neighbor. There was a large grassed area on the side of the building that the cat had fallen, and edging the base of the building was a 2-foot wide strip of plants and shrubbery that was mostly overgrown with weeds. The cat was nowhere to be seen. I found it crouched inside the shrubbery immediately below our bedroom window, and it didn't appear to be injured, but It did look very shocked. I carefully took it out and was relieved it didn't protest. At that point, Vivian appeared in slippers and a dressing gown, and with her help, I was better able to examine the animal. It didn't appear hurt at all, perhaps bruised, but nothing else. We took it back indoors. It proved to have been miraculously uninjured and went on about life as normal, sitting on indoor window ledges looking out, but it never went out an open window again. When we returned to our bed, my thoughts were on what had happened, and so the memory of the specter returned. Over the days, we had learned more of the unfortunate death of the young woman. She had been terminally ill for some time, and her young husband was helping to look after her at home. One Saturday night, the young man was preparing to go along to his local for his weekly few beers with his mates, but his young, ill wife told him she felt particularly bad that night. Instead of going into the nearby pub, he decided instead to get some cans of beer and take them straight home. Tragically, when he returned home with the beers, less than 15 minutes later, he found her dead. Tracing back the days with Vivian, I found that the night I had seen the specter of the carriage was the same night that the young woman had passed away, although the timing is a little inconsistent, as it would have been around midnight that I saw the ghostly vision. The tale did not end there. A very short time after the death of his wife, the young man moved out of the house, perhaps feeling unable to continue living there. Several days later, neighboring residents telephoned police after hearing noises in the empty property and thinking it had been broken into. When police arrived, they were completely baffled at what they found. There were no signs at all of any break-in, and the maisonette was empty, but cupboards and drawers were open and items had been haphazardly scattered around inside the property, particularly in the kitchen. The next day, local council workers boarded up the empty property's front door and all windows, but the strangeness was to continue. Again, a few days later, neighbors rang police to report loud crashing noises coming from inside the boarded-up maisonette. When police arrived, they too heard crashing noises from within, but found all windows and the door to be tightly boarded with no way in or out of the property. The fire brigade was called to get into the building. No more sounds were heard, and when police eventually entered the building, they found it had been ransacked even more violently than before, with many items broken and items flung about. The events became news, and soon after, at the request of the local authorities, a senior cleric carried out an official exorcism of the property. Following the exorcism, no further disturbances were reported to have taken place. Before moving away from the area ourselves, I was sitting in the Sun Pub by the railway station and was telling a local man about the odd event of the ghostly carriage. He listened thoughtfully and after a time asked if I knew much of the history of Slade Green. I didn't, and he told me how the maisonettes were built on land that was a former mud plain alongside the nearby River Thames, and that the land had sunk considerably over many years. He said that there had once been an important carriage route that passed through Slade Green, linking routes into London from places such as Canterbury, Rochester, and Margate. He said it was also quite possible that the original route might have been on a level when it exited with what was now the top floor of a 2-story maisonette block. The Banshee's Cry. Such an unusual way to begin an unusual story. This took place in Canada. For several days the weather had been behaving rather oddly in the area we were visiting, a fitting description for heavy rain, howling winds, and a black sky, when it was supposed to be spring. Granted, I wasn't expecting cute little bunnies frolicking around, but I was expecting sunshine or anything not efficiently killing the mood. It didn't help much either that Laura's rather wealthy aunt had passed away and left her with nothing but a creepy house that had been abandoned since the day she died. Turngate, that is the name of the house. I'll be blunt. If you think it probably has a long and boring history of gruesome events tied to it, like in a cliché horror flick, well, it seems that it has. Not exactly founded upon an Indian graveyard, oh no. It just seems that women and children have died brutally at that location, and Laura's aunt found that to be very exciting and decided to live there, and now she's dead. It didn't get any better that a mysterious case of death had happened at least That was what we could make of some of the people in Hastings when shopping for provisions. Some guy decided to go adventuring in the house some years ago and went missing for some days. Rumor had it that he had vanished without a trace. Some others believed he moved away, but there was this creepy story that his body was found on the outskirts of the forest. His hair turned white and his eyes had been removed, but the body then disappeared from the mortuary, leaving the local authorities baffled. Folklore or urban legend? I think that's what Laura and Jennifer thought, because naturally we had to go exploring in the house, even though it was in the middle of nowhere. I'll admit that's how a bad movie starts. Jen was freaked out from the start. I think the whole mess began when we started psyching each other up with stories about serial killers. So it turned into a who gets scared competition, with Laura getting the terrific idea of splitting up while exploring. To be honest, I wasn't scared, but Jen looked like she was going to faint at any minute before I headed into the kitchen. As expected, it was empty, dusty, and the stench of the contents of the fridge that expired last year was near unbearable. I was already on my way out of the kitchen when I noticed the tapestry. The letters Tuurngait, Turngat, were clawed in. Talk about having a bad taste. The same thing didn't exactly apply for the ceiling, it was just painted black. I believe Laura was rummaging around upstairs because it seemed that the black paint was moving slightly, and a drop of the paint or tar or whatever undefined substance it was landed in my right eye. Rather disgusting. But right after that, I heard the scream. Even now when I think of it, it hurts in my ears. It was piercing and relentless. I don't know how else to describe it, other than it sounded like the scream of a woman or a girl being tormented. But it was immaterial. It seemed to be coming from within the wall. I think that's what they describe as a banshee in certain movies. I guess when the shock had settled a few minutes later, I was finally able to control my knees and on my way to meet the others, or rather to yell at them, as I was certain that one of them was to be held responsible for the little prank. One of them was in an awful hurry. At least I saw her shadow quickly running into another room. I went up the stairs, and to my surprise, both of them were already present. Needless to say, all three of us ended up arguing. Me and Jennifer decided to return back to the States, but Laura wanted to stay for some days and find her own way home. That was a couple of weeks ago. And the day after Laura, my best friend vanished without a trace. Of course, the police dismissed my story as yet another urban legend revolving around the house, suspecting another crime they could add to their list of unsolved mysteries. And as I'm writing this, fully knowing that most people will demand to have me locked up, I can honestly say that not even half the story has been told yet. There is more than meets the eye. Something is happening, here, now. I saw a shadow yesterday out of the corner of my eye, shaped like a black solid fog, that seemed to be moving towards me. But when I looked, it was gone. I feel that I am being chased. Whenever I leave my house, when I went to bed yesterday, I could swear that I heard something whispering, "Turngate." My imagination, right? Perhaps that's why I decided just to write it all down and share the story. Get closure of some sorts, if I can find someone who will believe me. I've done my fair share of crying already. Now people just need to know. Enough writing for today. My eyes have been hurting. They have been hurting since I got home from Canada. But the story doesn't end here. It goes on. The ghost that came home with me. I'm sorry it's been such a long time getting back with a real story about my house guest, who I will call Bobby. I guess you'll want to know where I found Bobby. I've been working in this hotel that is 130 years old, and from the start of my job I felt like I was being watched, and sometimes I'd see a man standing at the phone looking in at me from the front offices. The whole time I didn't think he was a ghost because he was not see-through at all. That was until one day when he showed himself to me at home. The first thing I felt was how cold my living room was getting. Then I saw something on my left side, and I turned around to look over to the hall, and the same man I saw watching me at work was standing in my home for about 1 minute. He looked at me, then he smiled at me, and All this time I didn't move or say a word. Right after his smile, he turned and walked towards the front door. The door did not open because it makes lots of noise, but when I looked all over the house, I didn't find him. All my windows and doors were locked. I didn't see him for some time, but things started to go missing, and some time later, I'd find my keys or one of the books I was reading that had gone missing before. I did find my keys in one of my flower holders for cut flowers, and the book was up in the ceiling, light shade in the bedroom. These are really weird places that I know I would never have left them at. Sometimes I'd come and find that my bed was moved away from the wall, and it was moved to the wall on the left side of my bedroom. Sometime I'd come home and find all my light bulbs were sitting in the living room on the floor, yet not one of them was broken. Also, my cats are always watching the door to the hall. I would go and see if anything was in the hall. When this would happen, it would take some time for my cats to get back to normal. I have never felt that he would hurt my cats or myself. I have not felt him around for some time now, but things are still going missing. Does that mean that maybe there's somebody else here? P.S. I think this man was a cowboy in the old days, out west, when gold was found. Last week I had a dream where he told me he came to town from the gold fields with a lot of money. Later that day he went and had some beer and a lady of the night. He said that the lady's boyfriend found them in bed and a fight started in the room and ended up in a bloody alley where he was killed in a gunfight and was robbed of his money and his loot. Just after he told me, I woke up feeling like he was still in my room. Well, maybe he is the only ghost after all.